Now that I see a couple more people joining in and we're after the hour, let's go ahead and get started. So, welcome everyone again to today's office hour session that's focused on legislative updates and advocacy opportunities. The framing for this is to provide you all information on bills that are pertinent to community power and CPCNH in particular, and also advancing market innovation or bills that may have market related impacts or energy related impacts within the state. We have some great speakers that will be joining us today, and I'll introduce them in a moment. But the focus is really going to be on what's ahead for 2026. So, in terms of a brief agenda for the session, the first 10 minutes we'll be focusing on the legislative updates, and then we'll move into CPCNH priority legislation and a live demo of Bill Tracker. There'll be a discussion on, what's coming with hearings and more, and then a brief on how to engage, and finally, plenty of time for a QA session and wrap up at the end. So today we're fortunate to have three great folks to speak on this topic. We have, of course, Dina Dennis, our Director of Regulatory and Legislative Affairs with CPCNH. We also have two people from Main Street Strategic, Andrew Provencher, who is the principal, and we also have Tyler Clark that will be joining us towards the end of the session, who's the VP of Government and Public Relations. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dina.
Great. Thank you so much, Jackson. And thank you everybody for being with us today. Before we get into some of the nuts and bolts of this discussion, I wanted to invite Andrew Provencher on to come talk to us and share an update on what's going on in Concord the last 3 weeks. So Andrew, do you want to put your camera on?
Sure. Yeah. You see me all right?
Yeah.
Great. Awesome. Great to talk to everyone. Always love having an opportunity to chat with all the folks at CPCNH. In typical fashion, the New Hampshire legislature is off to a blazing speed right now. The second part of a session generally deals with a lot of policy items, and in a general sense, the legislature seems to move pretty quickly. A lot of folks like to get a lot of their work done prior to June, so that folks who are going to be running for re-election have some opportunity to, start knocking doors and getting out in the community. At the beginning of January here, we started having hearings. There've been a pretty robust hearing schedule. It's been relatively common in a number of the Senate hearings for bills to be heard and then them to go into an executive session and vote in committee on that bill. There's a number of bills that have already been put onto an updated calendar for the Senate. The House has been moving very quickly as well too. A little bit of a different feel for the House right now, with their hearings taking place at Granite Place as the legislative office building, which is located directly behind the State House, is going through some renovations. So it's a kind of different committee space, a little bit of a different feel. They also have a limitation of that building locking at 5 p.m. So we've noticed in a number of hearings, if their schedule is getting kind of tight, they've limited the time for speaking to only like 2 minutes or 3 minutes, depending on the committee, for testimony. So it's been a little bit of a different feel in some ways, but I think that everyone's kind of getting used to it, and it's like I said, moving pretty quickly. We've had a few priority bills that I know that we'll kind of get into in a little bit. And one of our bills, thankfully, had a public hearing in the Senate, and then was one of the ones that went into an executive session right afterwards, and had a positive recommendation, which is great. Always nice when we're on the good end of it. And we have a number of bills coming up here in the next few weeks. I would expect that, by middle of February, a lot of the things that we're tracking will have had public hearings and been heard. And then we have a March crossover time period where those bills will then, if they're successful, move on to the other chamber to start the process over again. But I think that's kind of a general review of these first 3 weeks. Things are moving fast, and we're off to a good start.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrew, for sharing your always great insights. So just help folks understand. So this year tends to be more of a policy heavy focus session. And usually the first year of the biennium tends to be more focused on the budget, right? So walk us through this year. How many bills are we looking at in the House and the Senate compared to last year? And what are you seeing as some of the top level priorities, on energy and then other sort of hot button issues happening and playing out at the legislature?
Absolutely. The first session with them working on the budget, the first half of biennium, it's, a lot of these are priorities and how dollars are being spent for the state. And then when you get into the second part of the session, those dollars have already been accounted for and spent. So a lot of bills that have fiscal notes on them or are going to have some sort of fiscal impact, I think are probably generally viewed a little less favorably in the second half because we haven't already planned on how those are going to be paid. With New Hampshire right now, revenues have been kind of hit and miss, to be honest. And depending on kind of who you talk to and what you look at, we could be right up against it, or it could be, it could be a little bit of a gap. So I think that folks are, definitely very, fiscally conscious right now in terms of spending. There's the old kind of rumor that if there are bills that a department doesn't like right now, they're slapping kind of larger fiscal impacts on those bills when they go through for a review in order to kind of paint them in a bad light. So I think that there's that's obviously something that is effective in some regards. About 1,200, a little over 1,200 pieces of legislation that are going to go through the process this year. And just as just so you know, in New Hampshire, we're unique in that every bill that's filed is going to be heard in committee. The committee is going to vote on that for a recommendation, and then the full body of the House or the Senate will then vote on that bill too. So, for a bill to become law in New Hampshire, it's likely been heard in at least two public hearings. There's been two full bodies that have voted on it. If it had a fiscal impact, it would be heard by a second committee in many cases as well too. So, a lot of opportunities in New Hampshire to be engaged in the process. And I think sometimes you'll see like a news story that says the House has passed X, Y, and Z, or the Senate has passed X, Y, and Z, and it feels like there's finality to that. But it's really just one third of the process, and the sausage making, so to speak, in Concord takes some time, and I think it's intentionally built to be very focused on giving ample opportunity for individuals and organizations to participate in the process. And I know later today you'll talk a little bit about some of the ways that you can be involved in that process. And I think that there is, fortunately, a lot of different ways to be heard in New Hampshire. But yeah, lots of bills, and every committee is kind of moving pretty quickly. And I think we'll have a pretty good idea come March with the amount of bills that come over on crossover. So bills that one of the chambers has positively passed, and really seeing how tight to that June deadline they'll be in finishing up their work.
Wow, Andrew, that's astounding. 1,200 bills. It blows my mind away. And it seems like every year that I've been working in this legislature, which is three now, the number keeps going up and up. You mentioned something about fiscal impact, and I had a question. I think there's probably a lot of folks who see bill numbers and then they see this dash FN after the bill number. What does that mean? And what does that mean in terms of the process for a bill to be moving through committee and chambers?
Yeah. So a couple things. When you see a bill that has an FN, that means there's some sort of fiscal impact. If there's an L on there too, it could mean it has a local tax implication as well. And the kind of important things about those bills is the rules that are set under the House and the Senate, and these are kind of the organizational methods in which each body works by. They prioritize bills that have a fiscal impact. So that often committees will hear bills with fiscal impacts early so that they can make a recommendation on those bills. If those bills then are passed by the full chamber, they'll be referred to a second committee of that same chamber. So, for instance, if you had a Senate bill that had a fiscal impact, the Senate could have a public hearing. The committee could say, we think this is a good idea. The full Senate could say, we also think this is a good idea. And then they'll still send that bill back to Senate Finance to go over it from supposedly not from a policy standpoint at that point, but just from the fiscal impact standpoint of it. They'll then have a recommendation saying we still think it's a good idea, and send it back to the full Senate, who then pass it and send it over to the House. And when the House deals with those bills too, they'll often have a second committee of finance work on those bills. And once again, the policy committee, the committee that's working on the policy aspect of the bill, is the first one, and then the finance is working on more of the fiscal impact of the fiscal implications of the bill, and they're generally not supposed to worry as much about what the policy of it is as much as the dollars and cents of it. So because it has to go through that second layer of review and insight, they prioritize those bills on getting finished earlier, and they have an earlier schedule for which they have to be out of their committee.
Thank you, Andrew. That's really helpful. So we're sitting here wrapping up the end of week 3 of the session. We're getting close to closing out January, which is a relief. Talk to us, refresh our memory about crossover. What are the deadlines in the House and the Senate? What does that mean in terms of bills that started out in one chamber and having to cross over to another chamber? And then what does that second final sprint look like between crossover and the end of session in June?
Absolutely. So in the end of March, you'll have bills crossover. So this will be, and this is kind of a process that's happening throughout the year, but you have a deadline in which all those bills have to be acted on. So back to our other example, you had that bill that went through Senate Finance. The Senate passes it. That bill then crosses over and goes from the House in this case, the Senate into the House. And then the House will begin their process with a public hearing and anything else that might go along with that bill. Once you have a bill go through that second part of the chamber, if the House and the Senate are on the same exact page, the bill is ought to pass OTP. If the House has already heard it and the Senate's heard it and there's been no changes to the bill, and both chambers have passed it, that will head on to the governor for signature, or for it to veto, or for it to become law without signature. The other option is if the House or the Senate has made any changes to the legislation, they're going to pass it OTPA, so they're passing it with an amendment. That bill then gets passed with an amendment, and it's then sent back over to the opposite chamber, and the chamber can decide, hey, we think this is a good change, we like it, in which case they would concur with it, pass it, and send it to the governor. Or they might say, we don't like this change at all, we don't even want to talk about it, in which case they would non-concur and the bill would die. Or they could say, we want to talk to you, we want to kind of negotiate with you on these changes. And at that point, they would request a committee of conference. And the committee of conference are put together with members of the Senate and the House. They both sit down in a room and they talk about each other's positions on this bill and see if there might be some sort of change or negotiation that they can do amongst each other to get a piece of legislation that both chambers would agree on. Sometimes they're unable to do that and the bill dies. Many times they are able to work out something, and then both chambers would then have to pass that kind of negotiated deal before it heads over to the governor. So once again, just kind of another large layer. Those committees of conferences are being formed generally, towards the end of that session timeline because the bills have passed through all this process.
Got it, Andrew. So we've got a long ways to go before we start thinking about committees of conference and lining the governor up for a signature on any one of our priority bills. But it is helpful to understand the process. And so the committees are kind of prioritizing those bills that have a fiscal impact or those bills that have an FN after their number, because that deadline is earlier than the end of March crossover. And once those bills, if they come out of committee and they go onto the floor, then they would go to the finance committee of that chamber first before crossing over. So that's very helpful to know. Before we switch gears to our next focus, I want to just invite anybody to come online or pop in the chat. If you have any burning questions for Andrew or anything that he talked about that you were confused by or you need some clarification. Andrew does have to hop off at 1:30 and his colleague Tyler will be picking up for the second half. Do we have anything in the chat? I'm looking here. Okay, David's note taker, AI assistant. Great, welcome.
I don't see anything in there, Dina.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you so much for now, Andrew. Feel free to hang on as there may be questions that come up in the next section. But you could go to the next slide, please. I wanted to just revisit, and for those of you who joined our legislative preview in December, some of this may be a review, but I just wanted to revisit. There are three bills that are more of a high priority for CPCNH this session. The first is Senate Bill 590, relative to electric aggregation plans. This bill allows municipalities to use revolving funds to support energy services as part of their energy aggregation plans without the use of taxes. This is an FN bill, so apology for not including the FN on it. This bill was one of the early ones heard in the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. It seems like so long ago, but it was the beginning of last week. It was heard in committee. We had worked with the New Hampshire Municipal Association as they had contributed to the fiscal analysis and had some questions and interests around the bill's approach and what it would do and what it wouldn't do. And we agreed that asking the prime sponsor to offer an amendment to clarify that it would not be using local taxes that could go into this revolving fund. And the bill sponsor was very receptive to that. So when the bill was heard last Tuesday in committee, the bill sponsor, Senator Donovan Fenton, introduced the bill, and he also introduced the amendment. The hearing went great. CPCNH testified. We also had one of our member reps and board directors, Bruce Tucker from Peterborough. He was one of Senator Fenton's local constituents that requested the bill. CENH and others also testified in support. I don't remember anybody testifying in opposition. And after the hearing, the committee immediately went into an executive session and they voted to adopt the proposed amendment from Senator Fenton. And then they recommended the bill ought to pass as amended. So it's the first bill that came out of the Energy Committee this year. And it will go on to the Senate floor next Thursday, the 29th. So that's really exciting, coming out of the gate with such an early great development. Now, Andrew, just
one thing I'd add there too is just that bill was also put on the consent calendar, and the consent calendar is pretty much a grouping of bills that are seen as not very controversial. There's, folks all kind of agree that they're, in nature, it's worth passing. So they bundle all those bills together on a consent calendar, and then at the beginning of the session, they're able to, on one vote, vote to approve all of those instead of hearing them individually and speaking on them or having a debate on them. So it's kind of like the highway fast pass in some cases legislatively. So it was great to not only have unanimous committee recommendation, but to also have that placed on consent.
Thank you, Andrew. That is great to clarify that. And then, so Andrew, just to confirm, after assuming it passes the Senate next Thursday, would it then be referred to Senate Finance before it crosses over or goes over to the House?
Yeah, it very well could through Senate rules. Sometimes both chambers have, the ability to kind of determine if that fiscal impact is one that's, serious in nature. I'd say it's likely that this does go back to Senate Finance for a rubber stamp of sorts.
Sure. Great. And then next on our list is House Bill 1718. This bill relates to the authorization of energy storage in connection with net energy metering. The prime sponsor is Representative Michael Vose. And then there's other Republican and Democrat sponsors in both the House and the Senate. This bill is kind of a culmination of some of the work that CPCNH did last year out of our Energy Forward Act bills. And Representative Vose had organized some stakeholder sessions at the end of last summer with the intent of trying to find consensus on at least a few components of the bill package that we introduced last year. And So while this is not representative of everything that we'd like to see happen in terms of moving toward an innovative local power market for New Hampshire, it's a positive step forward for recognizing that energy storage can play a valuable role in New Hampshire's energy system, in particular when it's paired with net metering. So this bill is being heard on Monday at 3 o'clock. We just found this out yesterday. And of course, with the winter storm coming, we're keeping an eye on forecasts, and we'll be paying attention to the speaker's office because it's my understanding, Andrew, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the speaker's office and the Senate president's office will determine if they're going to be canceling any of the hearings and meetings going on that day. And we would hear from them probably sometime over the next couple of days, like by Sunday.
That's right. And I think that it really I think they generally do hold a lot of work. I think that if the storm was to hit very early and there was like clear highways and their members from all over the state, there's a lot of some folks have quite a commute, right? If you're driving down from northern New Hampshire or the western part of the state. So if there's if the storm's not hitting late in the day, I mean, it very well could end up happening. But if it's as big of a storm and kind of as long as generated as it is, and the roads aren't safe, they'll likely postpone those activities.
Yeah, thank you for that. So this is a bill that CPCNH supports. However, we support the bill with an amendment that would clarify that the Public Utilities Commission can determine how storage can be charged from the grid when it participates as part of net metering. The way the bill was introduced, it did not include this language. So right now, the bill includes language that specifies that the storage device can only be charged from the renewable energy net metered generation source. And obviously that is not ideal for a number of reasons. And so we're working closely with some of the utilities and bill sponsors and other entities to have an amendment ready to be introduced on Monday at the hearing, and also just to build support for it, because House Bill 1718, along with a number of others, is also being scheduled for executive session in the committee the following afternoon, so Tuesday afternoon. CPCNH is preparing an action alert, and that should be going out later today or this evening. So we do invite you to let your voice be heard. Reach out to committee members, especially if they represent you or your communities. You can also do this online by signing in your indication of support or submitting testimony. And we'll encourage you, if you do sign in and submit remote testimony, that you include support for this clarifying amendment. And we'll be giving you that template language in the action alert. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, great. So the third high priority bill from CPCNH's perspective is House Bill 1002. This is a bill that the board approved a position to oppose. And this bill would repeal the local solar energy system tax exemption, which is problematic for a number of reasons. The House ST&E held a hearing this week on Tuesday. I would say the hearing was probably what a lot of folks expected. There were a lot of people in opposition to it. I think the only entity that, maybe there were two entities that spoke in favor, AFP, although AFP might have, I think AFP spoke in favor of another bill dealing with the RPS and the RECs, which we also oppose. But this bill, I think it was the prime sponsor was the only entity that spoke in support of this bill. And there were a long list. I think it was like 10 or 12 people who testified in person against this. And then I think there were over 100 people that signed in online indicating their opposition. This bill has also been scheduled for an executive session in committee next Tuesday. So we'll see where that goes. All right, I'm going to pause for any questions before I'm going to share my screen to just do a quick demo of the CPCNH advocacy page and the bill tracker and just kind of review all the different bills that CPCNH is taking a position on or monitoring this session. I don't see anything in the chat, so I'm going to continue on and I'm going to try to share my screen. Hey, Nick, I'm not seeing the option. I don't know if you have to give me permission to share screen.
Should be.
Oh, I just
Okay.
right in front of my face, as always the case. Okay, can you guys see my screen?
No, Dina, not yet.
Oh, all right, hold on a sec. Let's see if this works.
There you go. Now you're sharing.
Can you see? Okay, perfect. So if you go to the CPCNH webpage, and I'll back up just to direct everybody. All right, maybe this will work. Okay, so we're at the main page. And if you go up to the top over advocacy, you can either click on advocacy or on the bill tracker. And here's where you can find the bill tracker. You can sign up for action alerts if you're not already on our listserv. This button will direct you to the General Court's website to help you locate your legislator. You can find our 2025-2026 legislative platform here, and also our regulatory and advocacy filings can be found here. So we're going to go to the bill tracker, and we have a service through Fast Democracy that helps us keep this up to date in real time, and very organized. And so just to review, we have 4 different categories of bills that we engage in or take a position on. These bills get reviewed by the Regulatory and Legislative Affairs Committee, or RLAC, and then RLAC makes a recommendation to the board, and then the board approves the position on the bills. While RLAC is reviewing and deliberating its recommendations, it's looking to make sure that these bills align with the legislative platform, or they have some sort of impact, strong impact on community power, fair competition, and market innovation in New Hampshire. So when you go here, you can sort it by bills that CPCNH supports. So again, those are bills that align with our legislative platform and strategic policy goals. And this category means that they're bills that we are actively supporting or advocating for this session. So you can scroll down to look at all the bills, and I think there are about a dozen, if I recall. Oh, 14. So there's a couple of bills from last session that are still in play, so I think some of them are captured, but you'll see Senate Bill 590, the first one. And if you are wanting to subscribe to updates, you'll get kind of the information and what happened with the bill, where it's going next. You can also click to see the bill language as introduced. And if you want to subscribe to bill updates, you can click track this bill. If you don't have a free account with Fast Democracy, it will prompt you to set one up. But then you can set yourself up to get updates on any of the bills that CPCNH is supporting, opposing, monitoring, or engaging. It also has a feature if there's an upcoming hearing. So you can add this to your calendar if you want to be reminded or know when the bill will be heard and where it will be heard. You can just add that to your calendar. So just coming down through, oh, we see House Bill 1718 there. And then some other Senate bills and some other House bills. So those are all the bills that we're supporting. And then if you tab over to the next one, these are the bills that we oppose. And just to clarify, these are bills that would undermine New Hampshire's community power framework. They would harm competitive markets, customer choice, or otherwise negatively harm local energy control and innovation. And usually this category, it's fewer bills. So some of them that are still in play, like House Bill 723, from last year, Senate Bill 591, which we'll go over shortly. That is being heard in committee next Tuesday. There's a couple of bills that would do some harm to the renewable energy market in the state by changing the RPS and the REC program, and one of them takes the approach of zeroing out the alternative compliance program. So, we've taken a position to oppose some of those bills. That's 1542, 1721. Here's House Bill 1002 again, which is going to be having an executive session in committee next week. House Bill 1775, it's another bill that would allow utilities to own power generation. Of course, that's something that the law has prohibited since the Electric Utility Restructuring Act was passed in 1996. And then House Bill 610 is another bill from last year. Originally, the bill was going to get rid of the Office of the Consumer Advocate and sort of place it into the Department of Energy. The bill has now been amended over the fall, so this is something that RLAC may be looking at in February and possibly changing the position from opposed to maybe monitor or engage, which is a good thing. So those are the bills that we oppose. I'm going to go over to the bills that we engage in. This is actually a new category, and we decided, since there are so many bills that are more omnibus, where they're doing multiple things in one bill, and there may be some components or provisions that we support that align with our legislative platform, but there may be some other provisions that we don't quite oppose, but we might have some concerns or questions. So this is a category that allows us to engage constructively on these bills through testifying, educating lawmakers and stakeholders, proposing different amendments, and of course, not formally supporting or opposing. So there's, I believe, 8 bills in that category, and you can scroll down. I know a couple of them related to like performance-based regulation, alternative regulation are being heard in Senate committee next week. Those are the first 2. So you can take a look there. And then the biggest category are bills that we're monitoring, meaning they're legislation that we're taking a look at. It may not have a direct impact on community power and local control, but they may have some impact over the state's energy policy, markets, or member interests. But at least at the time being, we're not taking a formal position on. So this is usually the biggest category. You see we have 22 bills that we're monitoring. I think some of which are being heard, several of which are being heard in committee next week. So definitely take a look at that. If you are interested in receiving updates besides individual bill updates, you could send me an email, let me know, and I can put you on a list where it will generate you a report weekly, and you'll get one individually for the bills that we support, one for the bills we oppose, one that we monitor, and one that we engage. Right now, all of the members of the RLAC committee are on that, as well as I think the folks from the executive committee and some staff members. So if that's of interest, send me an email and I can put you on that list. So stop sharing for now. And if we could bring back up the slides.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and bring the slides up in a moment. I do see a message from Carol Schutte with Hampton Falls in the chat. HB 610 contains language that the consumer advocate must be a lawyer, engineer, and economist. I believe the consumer advocate must be a lawyer, something for CPCNH to consider.
Yep. Yeah, thank you, Carol, for sharing those updates on House Bill 610. We're still monitoring and keeping apprised, and also staying in touch with consumer advocate Don Kreese about that. My understanding was he helped support the amendment that is contained in the bill now. And maybe it's not quite a perfect solution, but I think it's better than the bill that as it was originally introduced.
I might add, I believe that's the one provision he's going to seek a change for in the Senate. But he couldn't persuade the committee chair in the House to change that provision, but he also agrees strongly that it should be an attorney who's the consumer advocate.
Great. Thank you for that clarification, Cliff. All right, let's go to the next slide, and I'll try to be brief because we have Tyler Clark from Main Street Strategic who just joined, and I want to give him plenty of time to talk to us about how CPCNH members and folks can engage in the legislature. Again, I'll just flag some upcoming hearings next week that we'll be engaging or advocating on. So in the Senate Energy Committee, we have Senate Bill 597. That's a bill that we're engaging on. Senate Bill 591, this is a bill that would allow utilities to own or build generation facilities, would essentially get rid of the Restructuring Act's prohibition on utilities ownership of generation without actually repealing the Restructuring Act. That one would certainly have many negative impacts, harmful impacts on the market, and really would undermine customer choice. Senate Bill 537 relates to repealing the PUC's ability to approve alternative forms of regulation. That's one we're engaging in. And then Senate Bill 518 is a bill that we're monitoring. So next slide, we're going to look at what's up in the House. A number of bills in the House. Of course, the House committee, ST&E, meets Mondays and Tuesdays. Senate committee only meets Tuesday mornings. Earlier this month, they were meeting Tuesday and Thursday, but now they seem to be back to just Tuesday mornings. So they've got some bills Monday, House Bill 1475 that we're monitoring. As mentioned, House Bill 1718, that's the storage can participate in net metering, the bill that we support with an amendment. House Bill 1455 is also going to be heard on Monday. And then on Tuesday, there are also bills, bills of interest. 1741, that's a bill that we are engaging in. It would allow, or I guess like direct utilities to propose programs for DER aggregation, or aggregated DERs like virtual power plants. There's certainly some merits with that idea. We think ultimately this can be served better through market competition and not just as a monopoly function. So we'll be helping to engage and encourage a broader view for that kind of innovation. House Bill 1738 is about RGGI. That's a monitor. House Bill 1739, I forgot to put the position, but that's another bill that we're monitoring. The legislature last year and this year very interested in data centers and AI and how they can position the state to be ready for these type of new electric customers and new economic development in the state. So it's definitely an area that we want to monitor as we look to, possibly engage more in this new area. So that's it for upcoming. One thing I'll flag briefly is the governor's State of the State address is going to take place on February 5th. That's a Thursday. Actually conflicts with our board meeting, so we'll be flagging that for our board chair and our AGM. So that's happening at 10 a.m. at the State House in the Representatives Hall. Anybody can attend. You can sit up in the gallery. It probably will be very crowded. So probably best is to get there early. It will also be live streamed. So of course, if you have any questions there, feel free to reach out to us. Or I think the governor also has contact information. And then I think we can go to the next slide. So before we go to our Q&A, I want to invite Tyler to come on camera. And we're going to just do a brief overview of how to engage in the legislature. Welcome, Tyler.
Hi, thanks for having me. And so my name's Tyler Clark. I work with Andrew Preventure, who was just in here, and we did a little bullpen switch. So good to see everybody on this Friday afternoon.
Great. Jackson, if you could stop sharing the slides, then it will allow me to share my screen again. Awesome, thank you. All right, here we go. Can you guys see this?
We can.
Okay. All right, perfect. So Tyler, go ahead and I will just follow along and navigate on the screen so folks can see.
Yeah, so one thing that I really stress to a lot of clients that we work with is it's great to have a lobbyist in the building. It's great to have us wearing our orange badges because we're people that are, seen as resources to House members, senators, counselors. And we come with a level of trust and a relationship that's been built over a long period of time. But the one thing that lobbyists cannot do for these reps is vote for them. So we always try to pair, constituents with elected officials or people from the same region. So that way, when they have a question about, the subject matter that you're interested in, they have like a local face that they can reach out to or somebody that they think of, like, oh, this person's reached out to me on this and, I'm familiar with them. So we really try to stress, these local relationships with folks because being one out of 400 reps, you don't get a lot of people reaching out to tell you that you're doing a good job or to ask questions. You more so get a lot of hate or requests to do things or whatnot. So when we have constituents reach out to be a resource, to be a friendly face, I think the reps really like it a lot. And it especially is helpful when there's things that go to like a floor vote because when you have 400 reps and about 20 or a little under 20 sitting on a committee, that committee is all that rep knows. So when it comes to a floor vote, they have no expertise on, say, energy issues. But if you're a member community and you have a good relationship with that rep and you're comfortable calling them or emailing them and just asking for their support or opposition for a bill, they're likely to heavily weight those comments because you're someone from their community. You're not in an orange badge. You're not being paid to talk to them. And they, for the most part, I believe a lot of reps are there to do their best for their community or their district. Sometimes they might be misguided in what they're voting on, but they do, for the most part, have a loyalty to their district. So I'll just briefly go through how you can weigh in on committees or how you can find your reps so that way you can connect with them. So I think if we just start with how you can find out who your rep is and their contact information, it's very similar for the House and the Senate side. But yes, you go to that House roster there. You can look up your town. It'll pull up not just the rep for your town, but say you have a flotarial district similar to District 37 there. I believe Representative Murray has Milford and Amherst, so she's listed as the float. You click that link, and that link will provide you with a phone number or an email address that they list. Not everybody lists their phone numbers anymore. Some people don't even list their home address on that page because maybe they received some nasty stuff in the mail or whatnot, which is unfortunate because everybody used to list that stuff. They even used to list their personal cell phone numbers. Um, but it gives you an idea as to how to contact them. It can show the bills that they're interested in. So maybe you're calling about an energy bill, but you see that they're also working on things that you care about, anything, for example, property taxes or any bill really. You can get an idea of what they've sponsored. You can see how they voted in the past on things. And this website is a tool that's pretty underutilized by the general public. I would say those of us who are paid to navigate this website know it like the back of our hand, but it is certainly a great tool to utilize. And if you ever have spare time, poke around the website and you can find out a lot of things, whether it's the way they vote or the schedules, the calendar, everything is on here. And it's very similar to look up your senator. It's actually far easier because they have bigger districts. So you just go to that Senate roster and you can see the towns listed. But this is the on screen right here is the weekly digital calendar. So if you go into that weekly calendar, you'll see each committee listed for that day. You can click on the committee and it'll show you the time that they're starting, all the bills that they're taking up, and the links to the YouTube. You can add it to your calendar. They've really done a lot of upgrades on this website the past 5 years. So right here, Dina is showing us how you can sign in on a bill. So using our tracker that's built for CPCNH, you can see, what days the hearings are, what bill number, etc. And you can go into this portal here and you can sign into these bills remotely for or against. And I believe on the House side of the portal, you can submit remote testimony. So you can upload a Word document or PDF or any file that would accept, and that'll be included as testimony in the record to the committee. But it's certainly come a long way as to what it used to be, where we used to have to drop off letters or you'd have to email every member on the committee. Um, Post-COVID, the legislature put a lot of effort into updating this stuff after we had to be fully remote for quite some time. Does anybody have any questions for me?
Tyler, I have a quick question. I know in the past the Senate did not have a remote sign-in feature, and it seems that this year they do have one. However, at the Senate hearings I've attended, nobody has mentioned the results of the remote sign-in and testimony. So can you tell us, like, is it good to utilize, or is it better to utilize just sending an email to the members of the committee, the Senate committee, when you want to have your voice heard or submit testimony?
So the Senate doesn't take online written testimony. So to submit something to the committee, you have to email the aide for that committee. And usually there's if you go to the Senate committees tab and you go to standing committees, because those are all the standing policy committees, there is an option to email the entire committee right there. So when you pull that link up, it sends you to a new email window, which will then include the emails of all the senators. What I also do in conjunction with that is I will look at the aide for that committee and I will include that aide on the email as well. So that way the aide makes sure it goes into the permanent record. But signing in virtually, my understanding is they may not read it out loud like the House does. The House committees, they'll say like, oh, we had 100 people for the bill and 125 against. But what it does do in the Senate is the Senate has bill hearing reports that are drafted by the aide who runs that committee. And so in the House, the clerk is usually a member of the committee, and they just take handwritten notes and send them around to the committee members only. The Senate has written documentation for every hearing that they hold, and it's usually found in the docket on the left-hand side. It'll say Senate hearing report, and it'll show everybody who signed in for, against, and neutral, and then it'll also outline and summarize testimony that the committee received, including answers to questions that the senators may have asked during that live hearing.
While there's a pause here, I see Carol has a hand up. Go ahead, Carol.
Thank you. Tyler, maybe you can help me with a beginner mistake that we made submitting testimony for the House. It was a Word document instead of a PDF, so it didn't show up. And we couldn't figure out if you could go back and modify your testimony, or if in our case, we changed the order, last name, first name, and resubmitted. But it'd be much better if we could figure out how to modify something if we made a mistake.
Yeah, so I think if you make a slight error, you can always resubmit, or you can do it manually by just emailing the clerk of the committee. So if you go to that standing committees tab, you'll see that a House member is listed as the clerk. It's their role to pass things on to the committee. So if you make a slight error, you can just send that person an email with the corrections, and they will forward it to the chair, the vice chair, and the other members.
Great, thanks for that. I'm not seeing any other hands or questions in the chat at this time. So
Excellent. I think that sums up what I had prepared, Dina, unless there's anything I might have missed. I'm happy to fill in the gaps that I could have left behind.
Yeah, I think that covers it. Maybe could I just ask you to expand upon, oh, I know you need to leave. If you could expand upon relationships and relationship building. I always think of it that you always want to have a relationship when you don't need one. So that way when you need one, you have it there. So is there any advice or tips you would give to the folks on the session today about reaching out and building a relationship and continuing to stay in touch and share updates, as opposed to just waiting until you have an ask for them during the heat of session?
I think cultivating a relationship that's going to have long-term benefits, really starts with being like a cheerleader for some of these folks. I mean, like I mentioned, they don't get a lot of love. It's a volunteer job, you know, they only get recognition really when they do something wrong or something that their neighbor doesn't like. So reaching out as just a resource, maybe you have a small bill that, might not do a lot, but it's something you can reach out to them and say like, hey, just want to put on your radar. I'm part of this group, and we would really appreciate your support for this. It came out of the committee, like 16-2. Like it's an easy lift. Like it's just a light touch on these folks. But building local relationships is critical for organizations to be successful with their advocacy. Some examples that I'll share that I've done in the past is, we work a lot with like different food banks in nonprofits that service folks, and getting that local food bank to create a relationship with their reps, is such a benefit to an organization like that because a rep will see something on the calendar for maybe this hotly contested bill, and they'll contact their who they think in their mind, the person that they met, that is like their local expert. The amount of people that just, they reach out to folks in their town who maybe like run a food bank or sit on the planning board, just for that local expertise to help guide them because they're human. They don't know everything. And they sit on one committee and there's 19 or 20 other committees that they don't have any idea what goes on in those committees other than what their caucus sheet tells them on the day of session. So, if they have someone local who's, giving them good, solid information and is a friendly face, you know, they will take those words into consideration and probably consider them far more than they would just a caucus sheet that says, the chair says to vote for this, the committee voted party lines to do this. Local connections are a huge benefit for any organization when dealing with the New Hampshire legislature.
Thank you, Tyler. That's well said. I know that you need to hop off. Gabrielle, I see you have your hand raised. Is your question for Tyler or no? All
Just
right,
to reinforce what he said, but yeah, I can wait.
great. Well, listen, I just want to thank you, Tyler, for joining today. We appreciate your insights and your time. And before we close out, we'll bring the slides back up and then just a last opportunity for questions. Thank you, Tyler.
Great. Thank you for having me. Stay safe this weekend.
Yes, you too. Great. Gabrielle, go ahead with your question. Oh, Gabrielle, you're on mute now.
Yep, I sure am. Sorry about that. Yeah, no, I just wanted to share that a group of us in town have decided we're going to reach out to all of our representatives and just have meetings with them one at a time to kind of introduce ourselves and learn more about what they're interested in and start to exactly what Tyler was just saying, start to build some of those relationships. And our first one was really instructive because we learned, there was a lot of areas of common ground, and also this representative knows nothing about energy, and so the fact that I'm on the local energy committee and active with CPCNH, he definitely sees me as a resource, and I think that's important to do. So just reinforcing that. And it was easy doing it in a group. I would say we made scones and coffee and had a nice gathering.
That's really wonderful. I'm excited to hear that you're doing that. And I think that's great that you're doing it together as part of a group. Always strength in numbers. And I'll just underscore that for what community power and this coalition is trying to do and effectuate the market, the changes that we want to see to realize the full promise of community power. We're going to need every relationship that we can, and we're going to need so many more supporters in the state house to secure support for the bills and the reforms that we want to achieve in the next biennium. So I think that's wonderful. Gabrielle and Tamworth maybe can be a model for relationship building with their local reps. So at this time, I don't see any questions. I did just want to kind of close out before we get to the top of the hour. On the next slide, I just want to flag some upcoming programming. April 17th, we're going to hold a legislative halftime report. It will take place during the regularly scheduled office hours, so you don't have to do anything different or register. We'll be here doing that, and then we'll also be doing a wrap up of the session sometime in mid to late June. So stay tuned and look out for that. We'll try to do it during an office hours, but I know with rate setting, we may need to schedule it separately. So thank you all so much for your time this afternoon and support, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions.
Yeah, thank you all. Stay warm this weekend. Really appreciate you joining again.
Thank you for having this program.
Thank you, Ken. A pleasure.